This is a corner to corner crochet blanket, and like the name suggests, you make it by building up on the diagonal from a corner, making it square by square in diagonal lines until it produces this large, beautiful pattern. I've only started doing corner to corner crocheting very recently, having found it sort of slightly intimidating to look at before. But actually, once you've got the hang of it, it's incredibly straightforward. And I think that it works up quicker than even a granny square, basic granny square blanket does. And the best thing about it, now I've used chunky yarn, but regardless, the way that the pattern builds in these little thick squares of 3 double crochets means that it's incredibly warm. So I'm making this as a baby blanket, and what you can see as a downside of the corner to corner crochet blanket is that the edges are not as neat as they are for some other patterns and styles of crocheting. So I'm going to make a border for it, and I'm not quite sure at this point whether I'm going to do single or double crochets for the border. So what we're going to do is make a couple of little crochets along the edge to see how they look. Regardless of which one of those I pick, all I'm going to need to do is to put a single stitch into each of the stitches that go around the edge, and then 3 stitches into that corner to enable it to have an appropriate not too tight shape. So let's have a look at some single crochets around the edge and some double crochets around the edge and see which one looks best. I think I'm going to do it in the pink yarn because it's probably easiest for you to see the stitches. I'm not sure if I'll stick with that for the final product, but we'll have a look. So here is the nice big ball of yarn. Lovely texture. So what I'm going to do is cast onto the hook. It's my 6mm hook that I used for the rest of the pattern. You do ideally want to stick with the same yarn and hook for edging these, just a little bit simpler. What I'm going to do is pop my hook into one of the edge stitches. Then if we're going to do a single crochet, we're going to yarn over and pull through both of those. So what that's done is it's slipped onto the blanket. We're going to make 1 chain as our first single crochet, and then we're going to go along this border, just making a single crochet into each of the edge stitches. So a single crochet is where you don't yarn over to begin with. You simply put your hook through the work, pick up the yarn, pull it through the stitch, pick up the yarn, pull it through the 2 loops. So here we've got our chain space, and that's a chain space that is 3 stitches long, because as you can see, that's approximately the correct distance for that space. And then we're going to keep single crocheting into these spaces along the edge. And as you can see, I'm hiding this tail of yarn by simply holding it between the stitch as it forms. So the stitch goes around the edge of the yarn like that. So that's what our single crochet edge would look like. And I've got to say, no, don't think it works for this one. So let's undo it. We're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to do it with doubles. And it's the same process. So we're going to cast onto the hook and then into the material. So starting one of those chain spaces is nice and easy for you to see. And for a double crochet, this is US terminology, we're going to, well, that's not what you want. Start again. I picked up the yarn off the edge by mistake. There we go. Right, so that's a slip stitch to join. Then we're going to chain 2 as the first double crochet. And we're going to make another stitch into that space. There we go. Right, I think that's going to look much nicer as we go along. Now you can see my hook slipped out there. That's where I've got a slip stitch along the edge of the blanket. So when you make the borders of corner to corner crochets, when you are decreasing the size of the blanket, you slip stitch along the edge, and they can be harder to get your hook into. And you can either poke through with a slightly smaller hook, or just as you go along, go slightly further down into the blanket. I mean, technically it's a slightly uneven edge then, but honestly, I don't think it notices. So here we go. One thing to think about when you're crocheting is what you're doing it for, who you're doing it for, and what you want to achieve. And sometimes I do things that I think other people consider a little bit sloppy, but for me the motivation is often getting it done and making it nice, but without it doing my head in. So if I can make it look almost perfect in a way that's going to be a lot quicker and easier to do, then 9 times out of 10 I'm gonna do that way. And I'm happy to describe to you how to do the less slightly cheating you way and make it look perfect. And I can, you know, do that if I want to, but for me, my motivation is generally very much getting things done in a way that's going to help me to still enjoy the hobby and to not find myself irritated by fussing over things that don't make a huge amount of difference. So there we go. Double crochet edge, I think, is the way to go on this corner to corner blanket. And here's what I've ended up with. So I went with 2 rows of double crochets around the edge in the end. You can see this curved shape that I've achieved in the corner of the blanket just by putting 3 double crochets into the corner rather than a single one. And as it goes around the edge of the blanket, I think it really brings it all together quite nicely. So that is one of the many ways to make a border for a corner to corner crochet blanket. So that's just double crochets, 2 rows of them all the way around the edge of the blanket. And in doing that border, you can also hide your loose ends. Hope that's been helpful. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments section below, and happy crocheting.